Sir, that vehicle violates HOA Regulation 4C. I blinked, not sure I heard him right. I looked at the clipboard, then at the smug face behind it, then back at my old military Jeep, the one I'd spent months restoring, the one I drove in parades, in honor of the guys I served with. Regulation 4C, I asked. What part of it? He didn't even glance at the paper. It says no military surplus equipment or vehicles on private property that affects the neighborhood aesthetic. I couldn't help but laugh, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I live in a free country, on land I own, and this man, this HOA board member, was telling me I couldn't park my tribute to the men who fought beside me. He saw my laugh as defiance. If it's not moved by Monday, we'll start fines. I nodded, slow and calm. All right, I said. If it's military surplus you don't like, I'll make sure you really see some. They had no idea what they were dealing with. This wasn't just about a truck. It was about respect, about history, and about to turn into something much, much bigger. I'm a veteran, served in the Army for 8 years. Saw things most people can't imagine. Lost friends. Made memories I carry with me every day. When I got out, I wanted something different. A quiet life. No loud noises, no chaos. Just peace. So I found a small house in a suburban neighborhood. Nice yards, quiet streets, friendly neighbors, or so I thought. I didn't want trouble. I kept to myself mostly. Worked a regular job. Took my dog for walks. Watched the sunsets from my porch. Normal stuff. It felt good after years of uncertainty. One of my favorite things was restoring military surplus gear. Old helmets, crates, tools, and vehicles. It helped me stay connected to my past without getting stuck there. It was a hobby, a way to honor those who served. My neighbors mostly didn't say much about it. A few would ask questions now and then. I explained what each piece meant. Told stories about where things came from. It was a part of me they didn't understand. But I never pushed. The military Jeep in my driveway? That was my pride. It was old, sure, but it was also a symbol. I spent weekends fixing it up, polishing it, making sure it looked just right. When I drove it around town, some folks would wave or salute. It felt good to be seen, even just a little. I never thought my love for military gear would cause a problem. I thought my neighbors would see it like I did, a sign of respect, history, and sacrifice. But sometimes, the things you cherish most can become the very things that put you at odds with the world around you. Little did I know, that quiet life I wanted was about to be turned upside down by the very people I called neighbors. One morning, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from the HOA, the Homeowners Association. I opened it carefully, curious. What now? The letter was polite but firm. It said there had been complaints about unsightly military items visible on my property. It mentioned things like camouflage gear, old crates, and a partially restored vehicle that did not fit the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. They asked me to remove or relocate these items immediately. I stared at the letter, confused. What exactly were they talking about? The crates? The camouflage net I used to cover a small stack of firewood? Or the Jeep I was slowly bringing back to life in my driveway? None of it was new. I'd lived here for 2 years, and this was the first time I heard a word. I checked the HOA rules. There was no mention of military surplus anywhere. Just the usual about keeping yards tidy and parking rules. Everything I had was on my private property and legal. Still, the letter warned of possible fines if I didn't comply. Annoyed, I picked up the phone and called the HOA office. I wanted clarity. I explained the situation. The woman on the other end sounded polite but vague. We're just enforcing neighborhood standards, she said. Several residents have expressed discomfort with the display of military-related items. I pressed for specifics. Which items exactly? Is there a written policy? She dodged the question. It's more about the feel of the neighborhood, sir. We want to keep things looking nice for everyone. I felt frustration rise. This wasn't about looks. It was about fear and misunderstanding. And now, they wanted me to hide a part of who I was. I hung up, unsure what to do next. The quiet life I'd hoped for was slipping away. And the letter was only the beginning. A few days after the letter, I was in the middle of fixing the Jeep when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, standing there was one of the HOA board members, clipboard in hand, looking serious. Good afternoon, he said, scanning the yard. We're here for an inspection. Some neighbors are concerned about the military items on your property. I swallowed the surprise but nodded. All right, come on in. He didn't waste time. Without asking, he started walking around the driveway and backyard, snapping photos of the Jeep, the crates, even my camouflage tarp. I stood quietly, feeling a mix of irritation and violation. It wasn't a military base, it was my home. Yet here he was, acting like he had the right to invade it. This isn't a military base, you know, he said with a smirk, eyes darting around. We live in a peaceful neighborhood. This kind of stuff doesn't belong here. I bit back a sharp reply, stayed calm. After a few minutes, he turned and handed me a notice. there's a pending rule change at the next HOA meeting. It would ban all military surplus displays visible from the street or common areas. All of it? He nodded. They want to keep the neighborhood welcoming and neutral. Some people say your gear intimidates them. Intimidates them? I thought about the veterans who might see my Jeep and feel proud, about the kids who asked questions and listened when I talked about service. But here, some people were scared. I shook my head slowly. Thank you for the information. I'll be at the meeting. He left without another word. The quiet life I wanted was gone. Now, this was personal, and it was about to get much worse. The night of the HOA meeting arrived. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I had to show up. This wasn't just about my Jeep or some crates anymore. It was about standing up for what mattered. I walked into the community hall, clutching a folder filled with photos, official documents and correspondence proving that everything on my property was within legal limits. I had even printed the HOA's own rules, showing there was no clear ban on military surplus. The room was packed. A few neighbors were there, but mostly it was the board members and their supporters. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the microphone and took a deep breath. I'm here to clarify some things about my property, I started. Everything I own is legal and on my private land. These items are not meant to intimidate anyone. They represent my service, my history, and my respect for those who sacrificed. I showed the photos of the Jeep, the restored gear, and explained what each piece meant to me. I talked about how this hobby helped me heal from my time in the military, how it connected me to something bigger than myself. But the board members barely looked up. One of them smirked, folding his arms like he already knew he would win. Finally, one woman on the board spoke up with a cold tone. With all due respect, sir, this kind of stuff intimidates people. It makes the neighborhood feel less welcoming. We want everyone to feel comfortable here. The room went silent. I glanced around, noticing a few neighbors nodding quietly in agreement. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Intimidate? I had never wanted to scare anyone. I just wanted to be accepted. I tried to respond, but the chair cut me off. We've heard enough. The vote will be held next week to decide on the new rule banning military surplus displays. I tried to respond, but the chair cut me off. We've heard enough. I left the meeting feeling betrayed. I was part of this community, but now I wasn't sure I belonged. Anger bubbled inside me, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't over. It never would be. After the meeting, I went home feeling drained. Part of me wanted to just let it go, maybe sell the Jeep, pack up the gear, and move somewhere they'd understand. Somewhere quieter. But as I sat in my living room, staring at the photos on my wall, pictures of my buddies, fallen comrades, moments frozen in time, I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about honoring those who served, about keeping their memories alive. The gear wasn't just stuff. It was a symbol of sacrifice, brotherhood, and resilience. I couldn't just let some rules, some people who didn't understand, erase that. So I picked up my phone and called an old friend, Mike. Mike runs a military surplus lot a few towns over, a guy who gets it. I told him what was happening, how the HOA wanted to ban my gear, how they thought it was intimidating. Mike laughed. You're kidding, right? Those folks don't know what they're messing with. I told him I was thinking about making a statement, something that would make the whole neighborhood take notice. He paused, then said, I might just have the thing for you. Got an old Deuce-and-a-Half sitting idle, big, loud, and unmistakably military. The idea hit me like a freight train. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. Not just a Jeep, not just crates and helmets. A real military vehicle, parked where everyone could see it. A reminder of what it all meant. Plans began to take shape in my mind. This wasn't just about stubbornness anymore. This was about respect. And maybe, just maybe, it was about changing a neighborhood's heart. The next steps were clear. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. It was early Saturday morning when the rumble started, a deep, steady roar that shook the quiet streets. The old Deuce-and-a-Half rolled in, its diesel engine humming like a beast waking up from a long sleep. I stood by, watching as the massive truck turned the corner and pulled into the visitor parking lot right in front of the HOA office. Every inch of that parking spot was legal. I made sure of it. No one could say I was trespassing. I climbed into the cab and carefully placed an American flag on the dashboard, letting it catch the morning light. Beside it, I stuck a POW/MIA decal, a silent tribute to those still missing, still fighting. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the noise and sight of the truck. Some came closer, eyes wide, a few nodded with respect. A group of kids gathered, pointing and whispering excitedly. Is that a real army truck? One of them asked. It sure is, I told them quietly, but not everyone was pleased. Inside the HOA office, I could almost feel the tension rising. The board members were already on the phone, voices sharp, pacing back and forth. Word spread fast. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered near the truck. Some neighbors gave thumbs up or saluted. Others just stared, stunned and unsure. I stayed calm, let the truck speak for me. This wasn't just a vehicle, it was a message. A reminder of sacrifice, pride, and standing up for what's right. The HOA called it a disruption. I called it truth. That morning, the quiet neighborhood had changed, and there was no going back. By that afternoon, the HOA was in full panic mode. They called an emergency meeting, scrambling to figure out how to deal with the giant Deuce-and-a-Half parked right under their noses. Threats flew fast and loud. We'll tow that truck, one board member shouted. It's an eyesore and a violation of community rules. I stayed calm. The truck was fully registered, insured, and parked legally in a public visitor spot. There was no reason to tow it. I knew my rights. Frustrated, the board called the police, hoping they'd get the truck removed. When the officers arrived, they took one look and shook their heads. "Sir," one cop said to me, "you're within your rights to park here. There's no law being broken." The board members looked stunned, their faces tight with anger. Word of the standoff spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started asking questions. Why was the HOA so upset about one truck? What were they really trying to hide? Veterans in the area began showing up, lending their voices and support. Some brought their own military gear to the HOA office. Quiet solidarity turned into a small but powerful demonstration. The board was losing control. For the first time, the neighborhood wasn't just watching, it was listening. And standing with me. That truck wasn't just metal and wheels anymore. It had become a symbol of respect, of community, and of refusing to back down. A week after the showdown, something unexpected happened. I got invited to the neighborhood barbecue. Not by the HOA board, but by neighbors who had started seeing me differently. That afternoon, I stood by the grill, surrounded by faces I barely knew. I shared my story, the army, the losses, the nights wrestling with PTSD. I talked about how the military gear wasn't just junk to me, it was a lifeline, a way to remember, to heal. People listened, some wiped their eyes, others nodded quietly. A few who had never spoken before came up and shook my hand. Then a kid, no older than 8, tugged at my sleeve and said, "That truck looks like a transformer." I laughed, and the tension in the air started to break. Conversations that had been cold and distant warmed up. Questions turned from "Why is he doing this?" to "Can I help?" Neighbors who had been indifferent now saw me as more than just the guy with the weird stuff. They saw a person, a veteran, a neighbor, someone worth knowing. The mood in the neighborhood shifted. What once felt like a battle zone became a place where understanding and respect grew. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Not just as a man with military gear, but as part of a community. And it changed everything. When the next HOA election came around, things felt different. The neighborhood had shifted, and people were ready for change. The old board, the ones who pushed the military gear ban, were voted out, replaced by a new group, a veteran like me, a firefighter, and a teacher. People who understood what community really meant. One of the first things the new board did was scrap the proposed ban on military surplus gear. They recognized that what some saw as intimidation was actually pride, history, and respect. They didn't stop there. The HOA started a monthly community hero spotlight, honoring veterans, first responders, and everyday neighbors who made a difference. It was a way to bring everyone together and celebrate what united us. A few weeks later, I was asked to help plan the Memorial Day event for the neighborhood. Me, a veteran, finally invited to share my experience and honor those who served. It felt like a victory, but not just for me. It was for the whole community. A sign that when people listen and open their hearts, change is possible. That old truck, the gear, and the fight weren't just about rules or property. They were about building understanding, respect, and pride. And in the end, that's what made this neighborhood feel like home. Looking back, I realize how close I came to walking away. Packing up the Jeep, selling the gear, leaving a neighborhood I once hoped to call home. But it wasn't really about winning or losing a battle with the HOA. It was about being seen, truly seen, for who I am, and what those things represent. Sometimes, people fear what they don't understand. The camouflage, the military vehicles, they saw as strange or intimidating. But for me, they were symbols of service, sacrifice, and healing. Standing my ground wasn't easy. There were moments I wanted to give up, but every time I held firm, I chipped away at that fear. I learned that change doesn't happen overnight. It starts with one person daring to speak up, to show up, to stand firm. And slowly, it spreads. So no, it was never just about the truck. It was about respect, community, and the courage to be yourself, even when it's hard. Sometimes, that's the biggest victory of all. I didn't fight for freedom overseas just to be told I couldn't own a piece of history in my own yard. This story isn't just about a truck or some old military gear. It's about standing up for what matters, respect, pride, and the memories of those who gave everything. Have you ever had to stand up to an unfair rule? Defend your values when others didn't understand? I want to hear your story. Sharing these experiences helps us all feel less alone and stronger together. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Your support helps stories like mine get heard. Stories that remind us why standing our ground matters. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change a whole community. Stay strong, stay proud,